Every white person alive today, every single one, is descended from people with dark skin. That's not a political statement, it's just genetics. So at some point, something changed. A population that had been dark-skinned for hundreds of thousands of years gradually became lighter, and then lighter still. The question is, why? The answer turns out to involve sunlight, vitamin deficiencies, a diet of mostly fish, and a farming revolution that nobody saw coming. And it all starts, like most things in human history, with survival. Go back about 2 million years. Our ancestors, early Homo erectus, looked nothing like us. They were covered in body hair, much like other primates. But they lived in one of the harshest environments on Earth, the open grasslands of sub-Saharan Africa. And they had developed a strategy for hunting that no other animal used. They didn't ambush. They didn't use tools or weapons. Not yet. They just ran. Persistence hunting. You follow an animal until it overheats and collapses. It could take hours, in the full heat of the day. The problem was, all that body hair trapped heat. And when your brain starts to overheat, you're in serious trouble. So over time, the body hair went away. Our ancestors became the sweatiest, most hairless large mammal on the planet. And that was actually a competitive advantage. But here's where skin enters the picture. Without hair as a barrier, the skin was fully exposed to African UV radiation. And African UV radiation is intense. UV rays don't just cause sunburn. At high enough doses, they break down a B vitamin called folate. And folate is critical for fetal development. Low folate leads to birth defects, failed pregnancies, and infant mortality. So here's what natural selection did. It turned up the melanin. Melanin is the pigment that makes skin dark. It absorbs UV radiation and shields the DNA and the folate beneath it. And over hundreds of thousands of years, the populations living in high UV environments evolved deeply pigmented skin, because the ones who didn't were far less likely to pass on their genes. Dark skin wasn't an accident. It was a solution. For a very long time, that was the whole story. But then, around 60,000 years ago, something shifted. Groups of Homo sapiens began moving out of Africa, through the Middle East, into Central Asia, and eventually into Europe. And the sky looked completely different there. In sub-Saharan Africa, the sun is nearly overhead year-round. UV radiation is constant and strong. But in northern Europe, even in summer, the sun spends most of the day at a steep angle. In winter, the UV index drops to almost nothing. Months of weak, indirect light. For a dark-skinned person living there, this created a slow-moving problem. The same melanin that protected them in Africa now blocked too much of the sunlight they desperately needed. Because it turns out, sunlight does something else, something critical. When UVB radiation hits your skin, it triggers the synthesis of vitamin D. Vitamin D is involved in calcium absorption, bone development, and immune function. The list of problems caused by vitamin D deficiency is long and serious. Soft, malformed bones, rickets in children, a weakened immune system. But perhaps the most consequential effect was one that specifically affected women. Chronic vitamin D deficiency causes the pelvis to develop abnormally. And in a world without hospitals, without cesarean sections, without any modern medicine, a narrow or malformed pelvis during childbirth was often fatal. For both mother and child. This is where evolution becomes deeply personal. The women who could absorb enough vitamin D survived childbirth at higher rates. Their children survived. And any genetic variation that helped them absorb more sunlight, including less melanin, would slowly, generation by generation, become more common. It's not a rapid transformation. It's incremental pressure, applied over thousands of years. Here's the thing that surprises most people. The first Europeans, the ones who arrived tens of thousands of years ago, were not white. We know this because in 2018, scientists extracted DNA from one of the oldest and most complete human skeletons ever found in Britain. He was about 10,000 years old. He was found in a cave in Somerset, England. His name, the name scientists gave him, is Cheddar Man. Cheddar Man had dark skin. He also had blue eyes and dark curly hair, which is a combination most people today would find surprising. But genetics doesn't follow our assumptions. So why did he still have dark skin, despite living in a low UV environment for generations? The answer is diet. Cheddar Man and his people were hunter-gatherers, and they ate a lot of fish, shellfish, and game. As it turns out, fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, herring, are one of the richest dietary sources of vitamin D on Earth. These people were getting their vitamin D from food, not sunlight, which meant the evolutionary pressure to develop lighter skin simply wasn't there yet. They had a workaround, a dietary safety net, but that safety net was about to disappear. Around 10,000 years ago, farming began spreading out of the Fertile Crescent, what is now the Middle East, and moved steadily into Europe. It wasn't like a sudden takeover. It was a slow expansion. Farming communities gradually displaced, intermixed with, and replaced hunter-gatherer populations across the continent. And with farming came a completely different diet: wheat, barley, lentils. These are nutritious foods, but they contain almost no vitamin D. When grain farming replaced the fish and meat diet that hunter-gatherers relied on, the dietary vitamin D supply collapsed, and the consequences were significant, especially in the north, where sunlight was already scarce. Now, for the first time, the pressure was on. The people who could absorb more sunlight, whose skin was a little lighter, who could synthesize more vitamin D even on a weak, overcast afternoon, they had a real advantage. They were healthier. Their bones developed better. Their children survived at higher rates. And over the next several thousand years, lighter skin spread quickly through European populations. Not because lighter skin was better, not because it was more evolved, but because in that specific environment, with that specific diet, it helped people survive.